Hello everyone and welcome back to The Favorite Comics, and for this week we are taking a look at the first, quoted here, first book we will be talking about with Moon Knight in it, and of course is Volume 1 of Moon Knight. This is a series that ran for 38 issues. They kind of did it during Marvel Legacy back in like 2017 where it came back under a new banner, but the first 38 issues of the 1980s series written by Don Mankey and by art by Bill Sienkiewicz. And this is the best, if not the only really crucial Moon Knight run that cements the character as the eternal D-lister in Marvel continuity. Now, this series, it's not my favorite Moon Knight series, I'll tell you guys that right now. It is the most influential, it's the most important, but I don't think it's my favorite. I do think, though, it holds a special place in my heart because it's like, this is him. This is the character of Moon Knight in my eyes, in the eyes of all these other people who know the character and love the character. This is where we all first start to know who he is. We learn who his rogues are, we learn who his characters are in this world, and everything about that works really well. Now, I don't think this episode of The Favorite Comics is going to be as long as other ones, just because I have talked so much about Moon Knight on this channel that there's not much else I can really say. But just in terms of The Favorite Comics, why does this one become so important to me, and why is it so supplemental in my comic book reading? Well, first off, it's a breezy 38 issues. They flow together really well. I think there's a really good understanding of creating a character in here. You know, it's like, all right, we have 38 issues. We don't know if we're going to get that many, but here we go. We're going to set up the character. We're going to set up who he is, how he acts, what his world is around him. We're going to set up his view of the world. We're going to set up his rogues. We're going to set up all these things that people like or don't like about the character, and we're going to give him a supporting cast. Now, here's something I really like. The first issue of this run, issue number 1, cements the character's origin. I know that's really, we see that a lot in comic books, like the first issue is the origin, but this is really important because the character was already established in Werewolf by Night. He was appearing, in like Marvel Premiere and all that stuff. So we never really had like a concrete origin for the character yet, but here he is. Here is the character Moon Knight. He is Marc Spector, and he is going to be working for this man named Bushman. This man Bushman sucks. He's going to kill Mark on purpose because Mark's going against him. He's going to be placed at the foot of Khonshu, the statue of the moon god, and he's going to be resurrected as the moon's Knight of Vengeance, thus becomes the Moon Knight. It's a really simple story that also has this very Shakespearean element to it. It's like there's tragedy, there's triumph, there is vengeance, there is revenge, there is insanity, there is love, there is respect, and there's the breaking of the psyche. This starts the idea that Moon Knight isn't really stable, or Marc Spector isn't really the smartest man in the world or the most sane, because he creates two identities to help him combat the forces of evil in New York City. The billionaire playboy Stephen Grant, which of course there's a billionaire side of him because Batman was popular. We needed to make a Batman. Moon Knight is not Batman, and I did a whole video talking about why not. And of course, the street taxi guy, Jake Lockley. Now, that's really cool. You rarely see in modern superhero stories, or even in this time, a character who has such a fragile and like broken mind like this. Now, it's not as broken as we'd see it in subsequent reading, but just the idea, like, yeah, Marc Spector needed the extra help from himself, so he created other identities to work with him and the people in his life. Marlene, she's just like, okay, that's cool. Just go do your thing. I like that a lot. Marlene Arlun is a character I have a lot of feelings on. I think in this run, she is very submissive, more than we see her later on, but she's also very supportive of Mark, which I kind of like. It's not this idea of like, we're going to hide the identity from the love interest. We're just going to be like, nah, we're not going to get married. Why should we get married? What's the point? My dad's dead. You're a crazy guy. We're not going to get married. But she's just like, go do your thing. It's like, you need to do this. You're going to do it regardless. So me telling you you're going to get hurt, you might. But who cares what I say? You're still going to do the thing. I kind of like that idea. It's more fleshed out with that, of course, of Marlene, but I do think she is a really great, complex character to add into this universe, and it only goes better for some of the other characters we see introduced in this run. Now, I do think there are some lackluster villains in the run. There's a lot of just like kind of like spin-off issues that don't really add anything to the character, which I get it. There's like some random ones that you fill up there, but it also cements some really good characters in here. Like Stained Glass Scarlet is one I really enjoy. I always thought that character had like a really good place in the 80s, and she's like this weird femme fatale kind of character. That's really good, especially depending on how you want to write Moon Knight. Now, in this time period, Moon Knight was kind of like the swashbuckling adventurer, like draped in the cloak. Everyone's going to see him swooping in, doing the right thing, saving the day. Kind of operatic, you know, like just, it feels like an opera kind of thing. I said Shakespeare and opera. So there's kind of like that sense that this character is like really prolific and intense, even if it's not that tense of a story. And I think the idea of like a femme fatale really adds to that. I think the idea of, you know, some interpretation of like the Egyptian lore with like mummies and resurrection and all that adds to the story too. And the idea of the mummies and there being like werewolves kind of adds to this idea of like this gothic horror thing that kind of could become Moon Knight. I think that's a really cool angle to see, and something that you don't get a lot of in this time period with these characters. You know, there's just something about him, something about Moon Knight, especially in this time period, I feel, where we just got all these different and interesting, complex narratives and characters and stories that Marvel wasn't really doing at this time. The 80s were really interesting for Marvel, and then Moon Knight was just this guy who was never the number one book. He was just off to the side, doing his own thing, existing in his own world, and then suddenly, here he is, stealing the D-list scene, becoming this character that would appear in numerous other books. At times it could become kind of meta, at times it became very adventure-esque. Like I said, the Kevin Feige himself described the Moon Knight show that will be coming out as very Indiana Jones, and to me that it's an interesting comparison. It's not one I've really thought about before until he said it, but I could get that a lot. I think there's a very, you know, adventurer feel to those stories while still being this gothic romance tragedy. I really enjoy that feel for it. I do think if you ever want to read supplement issues of Moon Knight, if you are somebody who is like, I don't like reading like 80s or 90s or 70s books, but you want to read Moon Knight, I do think it's crucial reading to start back here and work your way up to the more modern stuff, because everything you see going forward in the character, like all the writers, Chuck Houston, you know, even Bendis, for lack of a better term, Bemis and Lemire and Warren Ellis, all those guys pick up elements from this run to bring it to the forward. Now, there's been countless runs of Moon Knight, and I think that's really exciting, but this one just had that energy to it, you know? It had that dynamic art from Bill Sienkiewicz, which I think is really impressive. Doug Mahnke on the writing, he understood this character and what he was trying to do with it, and he went to all these different places, which is something I'm going to get to in a later video on this channel. But the idea of being able to perpetually be the D-list character allows you to go to different story opportunities. You're not just going to be, you know, the Spider-Man or the X-Men doing the things they do all the time. Being Moon Knight, you can take chances, and that's what this book did. Do you think if this was a mainstream comic book or a mainstream character, we would have given him 3 personalities? We would have forced him to become this weird, crazy psychopath who was doing all these different things, fighting mummies, punching werewolves, you know, fighting voodoo and losing his mind and going to all these weird places in this dark tragedy? We wouldn't. We wouldn't be able to go nearly as dark as we have with some of these things. And I think that's a really intense aspect of the character and something I really enjoy and I really respect about him. I really think this series, these 38 issues, there's hits and misses, of course, with every book like this when you need to do your filler stuff and you don't know when your book's going to end. I think there's some really intense stuff in there that holds up in today's audience with today's readers. That's going to be very enjoyable. And if you are excited for the TV show that's supposedly coming out in 2022, probably read these to get the information on what you're going to be seeing in that show, because I'd have to guess, I'd have to venture, you're going to be seeing a lot of the earlier issues of this run in that TV show. So I think that is really fun. That is a really cool aspect of the character we are going to be seeing on the big screen. And this series, Volume 1 of Moon Knight, from the 80s, staying in the 80s, it's exciting. What a great time to be a Moon Knight fan. We have access to all of these books through apps and stuff, and it's really fun reading. It's lighthearted, but it's dark, it's tragic, it's just really intense in a way you probably aren't going to be expecting for the character of Moon Knight. But even in the 80s, this book went to some really interesting angles, and it holds up surprisingly well. I recommend everybody read it. If you want to get a feel for the character that's going to become a breakout hit, if you want to understand why I love this character and why he's one that influenced me and I respect and admire and I want to be a fan of till the days I die, this is the run where it starts with 38 issues of Moon Knight, one of the best things we will ever see from the character, and that is why it is one of my favorite comics. Now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to this on the podcast feed, why don't you give us a rating over there? I always like to see how those come about. I appreciate it greatly. And as always, you can check me out on Instagram, Patreon, Twitter, all that good stuff. And I will catch you in the next one. Have fun. Stay safe. Good luck.
Our demon, face the vengeance of the Moon Knight.